Joining us now is Professor Tafadzwa Mabhaudhi, a climate change expert from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thank you very much for your time. Rain, felt fires, so much heat. Everyone has been saying it's climate change, it's climate change, it's climate change. But is there or has there been a point when we said, okay, what are we doing about it, or what needs to be done by who, how?
Okay, thanks. I think it's a very good question that you raise. Firstly, we can't link every event to climate change, although every time something happens, it's the quick go-to. But of course, generally speaking, what we do know is that with a warming climate, with warmer temperatures, these sort of things are going to be likely. The challenge that we have, which we are seeing now, is people only talk about disasters, after the fact, when they've happened, when storms have wreaked havoc and lives have been lost. In between, no one really pays attention to the issues. Whereas the actions that need to be taken are proactive actions. It's what we do before that matters when the disaster comes. How are we developing our infrastructure now that we are mindful? For the last 5 or so years, we've seen increased incidences of flooding throughout most of South Africa. Last year in December, we were talking flooding. In April this year, we're talking floods in several cities. So it's happening more frequently. But we now need to think proactively in terms of how do we actually plan better? How do we build our cities? And where do we locate human settlements? How do we rehabilitate the natural environment so that it plays its natural role in terms of flood attenuation? And how do we repair infrastructure and increase drainage capacity so that when it rains heavily, this water can be directed and diverted away from human settlements and into storage, because we actually need this water for dry periods. We've just come out of a drought in 2023-24, so we need to be using the water for storage for those dry periods, but at the same time, we need to ensure that it doesn't cause havoc. The same thing with high temperatures and the risk of wildfires. We know where the risk areas are, we know who is vulnerable, but what actions do we need to take before there are fires and people's lives are in danger?
Two things, Prof, just to make sure I understand you correctly. One, stop blaming everything on climate change. Did I get you correctly there?
Correct.
And two, just do your work. For those of us who have the responsibility or who've been entrusted with that responsibility, prepare for the extreme weather patterns and their impact, correct?
Correct.
And of course, that's not to say climate change cannot be blamed for some of what we're seeing, correct?
We can attribute some of what we are seeing to climate change, but a lot of what results from it is mostly a lack of preparedness on the part of ourselves as people. That is what allows then these things to escalate and the level of damage which we then see to happen.
Of course, we live in a country, you and I, where there has been serious issues of lack of delivery of basic service, let alone, planning for and planning ahead for the eventual failures or collapse of infrastructure for repairs and the like.
That is correct in many ways. But I think with climate change and what is happening, it's giving us a very clear call that we cannot carry on with business as usual. There were times when maybe we could have ignored infrastructure and nothing would have happened. But more and more, because of these extremes, that gets exposed when drainage fails, when systems fail, and people die, is what we are seeing, and property gets damaged. And what we are saying is we need to plan and be proactive. Being proactive is the most important thing. We need to build preparedness. It does not help to be distributing food parcels and planning about, emergency accommodation when people have already lost their houses, when people have already lost their means to provide food for themselves. That really does not help the situation. What helps the situation is if we are proactive, if we have climate sensitive urban and spatial planning and design that ensures that people are not residing in low level areas that are prone to flooding, that will flood. And those areas have flooded before and will flood again. The people who are affected this time have been affected before and will be affected again. How do we stop that cycle of the same people being exposed and being vulnerable? How do we prepare in a way that protects the lives of people? So that to me is the critical aspect of, we need to understand that there are people involved and they don't just move on after a disaster as quickly as the news moves on or as quickly as all of us who are not affected would move on.
Prof, I'm hearing you loudly and clearly. The question, of course, is whether the authorities are even listening. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.